welcome back to On the Workbench. Today we're working again on an 08 Saab 97X 5.3 liter GM Vortec engine. And today I'm going to be showing you how to replace a coil pack on a spark plug. We're going to be looking at cylinder number 2 on this engine. And so the first thing we're going to do to get started, like most under the hood repairs here, is remove our cosmetic engine cover. And then we're going to get right into the engine. And the parts we're going to need for today are going to be what I show next. Okay, so the parts that we're going to need today to replace our spark plug coil, first of all, is we're going to need a spark plug coil. And so I ordered online a replacement genuine AC Delco part from GM. And so I've got my part here. This came shipped very nicely packaged here. And so at one end here we've got the wire and where that's going to plug into our spark plug coil, our spark plug wire. Then on the top here is where our wiring harness is going to plug in to be able to receive the information from the engine about the spark that needs to be generated. And so we're going to make sure this is all carefully protected here. So I've got a blue towel out here just to set it down softly. And while I've got the system opened up, I'm also going to take the opportunity to clean my mass airflow sensor, since I've got to remove some of the same components to get to it, especially on cylinder number 2. So we're going to clean that with our mass airflow sensor cleaner spray. The tools that you'll need for the job today, we're going to have a long Phillips number 2 screwdriver, a long flat blade screwdriver, those are about 8 inches long or so, a 10mm wrench, preferably one that has a ratcheting action on it. That's going to make getting to the bottom bolt on the spark plug coil much easier. And finally, we're going to want a couple of extensions, perhaps to ratchet, as well as a 13mm deep well socket for removing our windshield washer. You also may want a few shop towels for trying to clean up some of the supplies and parts as they come off the engine, so they're all clean whenever they go back together. So back under the hood with the cosmetic cover removed, we now have our air intake assembly here. We've got our throttle body over here. We're going to use a Phillips head screwdriver to remove that, and then we're going to use a flathead screwdriver to remove the gasket here from the throttle body. And then over here on our air intake assembly, we're going to use a long Phillips screwdriver to be able to remove that. And then our mass airflow sensor is located right back here with this plug here, so we'll have to unsnap that, but then the actual sensor is inside the tubing here, so we'll spray that down with our mass airflow sensor cleaner. But we got to remove this because cylinder number 2, which is the one we're going to be replacing with our coil pack, is located right underneath back here, so we have to get this removed. And that's why it makes sense to go ahead and clean our mass airflow sensor since we're having to remove it. On the passenger side of the GM 5.3 liter Vortec engine are the even numbered cylinders, starting in the front 2, 4, 6, and 8 going back towards the rear of the vehicle. On the driver's side of the vehicle are cylinders 1, 3, 5, and 7, also working our way back. So today we're working on cylinder number 2. I'm having some troubles with cylinder number 2, and I've got it nailed down to what I believe to be a faulty coil pack. I'm not going to explain how I've determined it's a faulty coil pack. That's a whole different topic of conversation. But today we're going to look at just making that replacement once you've made that determination. So then I'm going to start with our long flat screwdriver to open up our air intake assembly. And there's going to be a screw up here by the windshield washer tank. There's going to be another one over here by our mass airflow sensor wire. Be careful around that wire. You may want to go ahead and disconnect that first. There's another one on the other side of our assembly. That's 3. And then the 4th screw is located off to the side here in the corner. You may have to be careful with this radiator hose to be able to get access to that screw that's located right down here. So then with that loosened up, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect our mass airflow sensor wire here. And so with that wiring adapter off, I'm just going to set that aside. And then I'm going to come back over here to our throttle body and open up the hose clamp there. And now on the Vortec assembly here, there's an extra little plug down here that goes off that plugs in to a little piece there. That'll work its way off as I lift this up. We're going to start here at the top by lifting that up first. And then this is going to come right off to the back. And if I reach my hand down gently and remove the tube from the bottom, that'll come out. And then as you see on the side here, I'm starting to get my air cleaner assembly to lift up. It'll take a little bit of finagling to get this out carefully. Be careful with the radiator hose. At the same time, you may also wish to inspect your air cleaner. You can see my air filter actually ended up staying in the vehicle as these parts came out. And so my air cleaner is actually relatively new. I replaced this about 3 weeks ago, so I feel pretty good about that. We'll set that aside. And now if we come over here beside the engine here, our coil pack for cylinder number 2 is located right here. It's the very first one forward on the vehicle. And depending upon how you get to this, you may want to be able to remove the windshield washer tank to get to it. We're going to come back with our socket and remove a bolt here. There's a bolt down there. And then the first thing we're going to do is, if we look here at the top, there's going to be a wire that snaps on. And we're going to undo that. And that'll come off just like that. We'll set that aside. And then you can reach down with your hand to be able to get the plug wire for spark plug number 2 off of the bottom. I might just go ahead and remove my washer tank here just to get better access to that. I'll show you how to do that here. And to do that, we're going to use a socket. And so then we're going to be using a 13mm socket to get to it. The one up top here, you don't really need quite so many extensions because that'll come out pretty easily. It's the one at the bolt at the bottom that's going to require the extensions. You probably want about a foot of length. This doesn't have to be super tight, so it'll probably come off pretty easily. And so then we got a bolt there. We'll set that aside. And so our other one's located all the way at the front of the vehicle. Be careful, you got your two washer pumps down there. Be careful you don't mess with the wires there. And so this is where you might need the extensions to get down there. You can take the ratchet off and finish it off by hand. Make sure you don't lose this nut down in the vehicle. You should be able to reach down there by hand to remove that. Be careful with the wires on the windshield washer pumps. And then over here on the side, up here back up towards the front, we've got 2 little plastic lines coming out. That goes for our front and our rear windshield wipers. We'll just get those out of the tank there. And then now using both hands, we're going to lift up on the tank and take it off of the studs like that. And then we can just tip this forward like this. And this should be able to hold itself up relatively well. And then now we've got full access down to our cylinder number 2 spark plug. Let's get another light there. And so now we're going to reach down and remove the spark plug wire from cylinder number 2 spark plug. Be careful with the boot here. Make sure you don't damage the boot. These are relatively new wires that I've also replaced in the last couple weeks as part of my diagnostics here on this vehicle. But then once it comes off, I'm going to just double check and inspect that to make sure that looks good. I can still see some dielectric grease on that wire. I'm going to set that aside. Okay, and then the tricky part is going to be there's 2 bolts. There's one up top and then one right down here. I don't know if you can see that with my hands here. We're going to have to go get in there with a socket and carefully get onto that to be able to remove those 2, and it's as easy as swapping it out. Okay, to get that, I'm going to use a 10mm ratcheting wrench to come over the top here to get onto this top bolt up here. Just a few turns with the wrench, you'll be able to displace that bolt. And then I'll finish it off the rest of the way by hand. Top one is easy. Careful you don't drop the bolt. That comes out. And then now we have to get to the bottom. I'll fish my wrench up in here. Just being careful here with my ratchety wrench, I can just loosen that up. Once I feel like I've got that loose, then I can come back here, hopefully by hand, and get that the rest of the way. The tricky part here is just working around these radiator hoses here. You got to be, this is where it's good to be delicate with your hands. And if you got some long fingers, we'll do the job. And then now with that bolt loose and all the wires off my coil pack, I can go ahead and remove the coil pack assembly here. I'm going to get the bolt out first. You have to be careful with the wires that are here to make sure you don't either end up losing a bolt or accidentally breaking a wire. And then just like that, our assembly comes right out. Now let's take this part and go compare it to our new part. So right off the bat here, by leaving that nut on there, I can see exactly the way that, which side is top and which way it needs to go. You can see the old one here on the left, the new one on the right. That's pretty obvious by the color. If we look at this, we can see down there, that actually looks pretty good there. And on top, at least those connectors look clean. However, that doesn't tell us the whole story about what's going on inside the coil pack. And so with that, I'm going to put my lower bolt right through our new coil pack here and take this over to the vehicle, and we're going to bolt it on. We're just going to look around, see if there's any other noticeable differences. It's interesting. Yep, you can see on the back side here where there's a little connection, still goes back here. I think that would probably be some form of a ground for how that would ground out and around touching the engine. At least I think. I could be wrong. If you think that's not a ground, please correct me in the comments. And on the sticker here, you could go ahead and write the date that you changed it here. I've got a maintenance log, so I'm not going to do that there and worry about that running off. I've got an Excel sheet of all the maintenance work I do on my vehicles, so I'll know exactly when it was replaced and which cylinder. So now I'll just take this back over to the vehicle and repeat the process in reverse and bolt it back on. So with the bolt out, I'm just going to be able to just drop this back in here. Be careful with my wires, making sure I'm delicate and gentle with those. And then the coil will just seat right down very naturally where it belongs. I'll plug in my wire here at the top just to help secure this in place. And then I'll come back with my bolts. I'm actually going to start with my bottom bolt because that's going to be the most difficult one here to get in. This is where it helps to be gentle with your fingers, to be able to work this around past your radiator hoses and get that down. And I'll just get that finger tight. Let's get a couple threads in there first. We'll come back with the one up top. There we go. Now I'm going to use my 10mm wrench and go ahead and tighten up the bottom. Get that nice and snug, and then we'll come back up here and snug up the top. There we go, just like that. Now, because I'm going to check my wire here, I still see, actually I think I'm going to add just a little dab of dielectric grease on that cable before I connect it. And a nice dab of dielectric grease. And this will plug right on the bottom of the assembly. It should give you a nice positive snap to know that it's all in there. And now the coil pack is changed. And now we can go ahead and put our washer tank back down. And so to take the washer tank, we're going to use both hands, lift this up, be careful with the wires. And we're going to have to reseat it on the two bolts. The one that's near the front and the other one that's near the rear, that's closer to the rear of the vehicle. And it'll take both hands to get that square, come back and then route the other cables through the openings. Now it's just a matter of dropping those bolts back on there. We'll put the first one here, just thread that on by hand right quick before I come back with the socket. And the other one on, we'll seat that also by hand. And then I can just come back here with my socket assembly and tighten out the rest of the way down. In this case here, a deep well socket is very useful to be able to get over the length of that stud. A shallow socket will not work here. Unless you've got one of those complete through sockets, that would probably work. I don't have any of those. Come back, do the one up front. And with this all open here, I went ahead and took time to go to clean this out, just to get that nice and clean. Since my air filter sits in there, we just want to minimize any grime, because eventually that'll get sucked into the air filter. So I might as well try to head that off by trying to just give that a nice little clean out there, so it's at least somewhat cleaner than it was before. Getting rid of some obvious dirt. And now it's on to take care of the air assembly. With my Vortec air assembly sitting up here on my bench, I'm going to go ahead and undo a pipe clamp here. I get better access to my mass airflow sensor. And then with this pipe clamp here undone, that'll help to loosen the assembly here. It'll take a little bit of work to get this disconnected from the airflow sensor. And now with the hose disconnected, if we look at our mass airflow sensor, this is from one end of the assembly here. You'll see there's a little thing here roughly at probably about 5 o'clock. That's our mass airflow sensor. It's a little probe of wire going through this little screen here. There's a screen here just to keep any obvious crud out of your throttle. And so that's what we're going to be spraying with our mass airflow sensor spray. Now you can use a variety of mass airflow sensor sprays here. You're going to want to make sure you get the squirt all the way around the entire sensor from both sides. So that's why it's important to be able to remove that. This is very quick drying. So we're going to give this just a few squirts on either side. We don't want to touch that sensor there ever with our fingers and risk any oils on that. We don't want that at all. That's why we're using this special spray. Don't touch that with your shop towel. Don't touch that with anything. We want to make sure we never ever touch that sensor. That the importance of that digital sensor there helps to control how our engine performs. And we'll come back from the other side, going through the screen to make sure we get the entire sensor cleaned. And now we're just going to let that sit for a few moments, and then we'll reassemble this and put this back together. While that's drying, we're going to look at the rest of our Vortec assembly, see if there's anything else in here that we might want to wipe clean. This actually looks pretty good, but if you did find any crud or sludge in there from perhaps an air filter being fouled or other problems, this would be a good time to go ahead and clean that out, just to keep the entire air intake process as clean as possible. At the same time that you have this open up, you might look at your throttle body assembly just to make sure and check on how that's looking case you're having the performance issues. In this case here, I replaced this not that long ago, so I know my throttle body's fine. And now, since we have this apart in our pieces, once this is completely dried, we're going to go ahead and reattach our Vortec air assembly. We got one piece here that goes over the throttle body. Now don't forget about the little tube here on the side. That's going to go down, and there's a little port down here where that's going to go. So when we get this on here, we got to make sure we get our tube in the right position to be able to access that. You can see it's right beside the place where you'd add the oil. It's nice and shiny. And so make sure we route all of our plumbing accordingly. And route that to get on there. That just presses in place like that. Then on top, there's a little snap in place there on top of the engine for the rest of our Vortec assembly here to go down. So once that's on the throttle and that's seated on the other place there, we can come back and use our flathead screwdriver and tighten up the assembly. And now with the Vortec assembly put together, we can go ahead and reattach our airflow assembly. The connector for the wire is going to go towards the back. That's just the way that we had it before. And so now we're going to press our hose over that. So then once we get this position where we approximately right, well, this will sit in this little spot on the washer tank. We can tighten that up, and then we can come back and add our air filter. Using our flat blade screwdriver, we'll tighten the hose clamp here. Just like that. And now add our air filter. Our air filter here. We'll just snap right on here. And with that on, I always have to come back and add the lid. You can see everything here sits right inside that washer tank, and that's why we want to make sure that everything is all clean underneath there. And then our next step is going to put the cover back on over the air filter. I'm sorry I forgot to film that. Got to make sure you get all your 4 screws all seated properly. It's a little bit of a juggle working around this radiator line. Pay careful attention that you don't damage any radiator lines in the process. And then come back here with our Phillips head screwdriver and then tighten up our 4 screws. Again, there's the one back here towards the radiator tank, the windshield wiper tank access. And then there's 2 on the side of our throttle, and then there's the one down here in the front corner. I think you can see me pointing right down here. And so make sure that those are all connected up. These screws are just going into a little thin metal clip on the back side, so you may have to sit here and use a second hand just to make sure that the clip isn't moving too much, and you can feel the screw thread in. The hardest one to get to is the one up here on the driver's side front corner. Passenger side front corner. Just make sure we get that down. If you have to, you can move the radiator hose if you're careful to get access to that screw. You'll want a nice screwdriver here. It's probably about at least 8 inches long or so to be able to get to that screw. Make sure you get a couple threads through the assembly back there. And then the final step is to make sure we re-plug in our mass airflow sensor wire. And so we're going to grab our wire, being careful as we work this around the assembly here. And then this is going to plug right back here onto the side, secure our safety clip back in place. And now we've got that replaced. All we have to do is put on our cosmetic cover. And so now, in just those few easy steps, we have cleaned our mass airflow sensor and replaced our cylinder 2 spark plug coil. So if you're performing this repair or a similar one, I hope you found this useful. Click the thumbs up button to like the video, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye.